onion. I mean, it's
Yes.
yeah, I could see that.
And as a female especially, I talk to myself a lot. So I know that I'm making a lot of good decisions, changing the world.
Pray for me.
But changing the world, but nothing's really happening. So I want to quickly, though, read this quote to you by an anonymous author. And it says, one of the biggest challenges with decision making is not the decision we make, it's decisions we don't make. I call it the default decision. It's where you keep moving, going along with routine without realizing you had a chance to make a different decision. You stick with the same product lines or the same client base or the same dietary habits. You raise your kids like your parents raised you, or perhaps you employ the same relationship model with your spouse for decades, even though your circumstances are dramatically changed. It doesn't feel like a decision. There's not a moment when someone puts an option in front of you or a time when you officially accept or decline a different path, yet every day you continue as is. The decision is not made by design, it's made by default. I love that. It's not made by design, it's made by default. And so this can apply to anything: finances, marriage, children, career, relationships, health, spiritual, anything. So with such a broad topic, of course, we could go so many routes with this, so many different ideas. Today, let's start by asking, what are your thoughts about this concept of default decision? It's made by design, not something that you actually chose to do, but you're just kind of in this situation because it just happened out that way. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think it's pretty true. If you assess your life right now, if you think about, your routine in the morning, you kind of have a lot of defaults that you could probably close your eyes and walk to your bathroom, or you could probably, there's so many different things that you're just in default mode. And I think this is a good place to touch on this subject, because the subject that we're touching on, like the overview for the month, is decisions I made that I did not know I was making. And kind of the genesis of that, my wife and I were walking in our neighborhood, and we were discussing a person in the church, an issue that they were having, and I just happened to comment that individual is dealing with the consequences now of decisions they made that I don't even think they knew they were making 20 years ago.
Right. That
set up what is now a default attitude or a default response or a default, from relationships on. And so I think, direct to the question, I think personally that the concept of the default decision is huge, and I think it's one that we can get into, but I think we really need to assess what our defaults are, because in my opinion, defaults are basically what our tendencies are. Right. And what our tendencies are will determine the direction of our life. So I think the default decision is really important because it's really true, it's really accurate, it's really real.
Well, I think just the idea that we make 33,000 to 35,000 decisions and you have no stream of conscience of making those. And then when you made the comment about I just automatically cut an onion with my right hand, that's something that I never thought was a decision. So I think it just goes to show how prominent default decisions are 100% in our life.
Exactly, because they're no longer decisions. They're decisions we made a long time ago when I decided, I think nature decided I was right-handed, but when I really decided to accept that,
this hand
it was a decision I made.
Do anything
Correct,
now.
So a lot of these, from what I'm hearing, gathers from our childhood. So you, obviously, they say that your most formidable years are up until 5, and then after that, you kind of set in your patterns, and you mimic what
behaviors.
You see.
Yeah, there's a lot of behaviors.
You mimic what your parents have taught you to do. And I like how it said, product lines. Use the same toothpaste your mom probably used just because that's what you've always known. You use the same sugar or the same butter or the same whatever because that's all you've ever seen them use. So a lot of it is probably through our teens. So how does that translate to us as adults, though? How does that translate over to, I guess it's a decision we're not making. We're not changing anything, so we just stay in that habit forever.
So I think if you're talking about the important decisions, I use this illustration when I talk about tendencies in a lesson on excellence, dealing with leaders. And that is, because what we're talking about is really the case. If you think about it, how many of you really think about, when you get up in the morning, you really think about, I'm going to brush my teeth?
No.
You just do it.
Right.
Well, how many of you need to confess?
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that, my Lord.
Hopefully you just do it.
But people, here's the deal. People have a tendency. Everybody say tendency.
Tendency.
People have a tendency to brush their teeth, and so now that tendency has resulted in a default decision, and it's set a pattern in your life forever. And so I think when we deal with the bigger issues, interestingly enough, the word tendency by Webster's dictionary says a proneness to a particular kind of action. But the second definition of Webster's, I think, really helps us know why we have to address, first of all, evaluate what our tendencies are, and maybe have to change some defaults with respect to our spirit man, with respect to disciplines in our life, how we conduct our health, et cetera. Because the second definition in Webster's for the word tendency is a direction or approach toward a place, an object, an effect, a limitation, etc. And so that's why I said your tendencies are going to determine your direction. It's literally the definition of the word. Whatever your tendencies are determines the direction of your life. So think about it spiritually. If you don't have a tendency yet to wake up and give God the first 20,
Right.
Yeah.
then the direction of your day is a bummer, and the direction of your week can be a bummer. And so how it relates to adults, I think, number one, we need to evaluate what we've allowed to become defaults.
Absolutely.
And if they're not good defaults, we need to change those tendencies.
Absolutely. So why do you feel that it's so hard to make a decision? Like, why do we feel that we struggle with this concept of making decisions in our life? Even if it makes, and maybe it boils down to, you're going to have to change something if you make a decision, but why do we struggle with that?
I think we struggle with it because I personally, by myself, I have decision fatigue. I manage a team of over 30 people. I'm with my daughter by myself. I have to maintain my home. I'm constantly making decisions. So when there's something that's thrown at me and I'm like, ugh, I don't know, like, what do you want to eat after church? I don't care. Just let's go. I'm here for the ride. I also think another component to that is we have consequences from our decisions. And sometimes we don't want to set ourselves up, or we're not willing to acknowledge or really go forward with what might happen from these decisions we make. So there's a lot of trepidation there. There's a lot of hesitation to, I call it like a soft decision making. Like, I might be available to do that. I don't know yet.
Or if I ignore this, it'll go away and I don't have to really make a decision.
I'm terrible
which is what
about
we're talking
that.
about.
Yeah.
You just kind of get in this groove
Yeah.
and you never change anything because you don't want to take the risk of what that might cost
Oh, yeah.
you.
Like, I remember when finances were way more stressful for me. I was like, I'm not even going to check my bank account. I don't want to know. Blissful denial. Decision I made. Oh, card denied. You should have checked your bank account. Like that kind of thing,
Or it goes through and you're like, yes!
I had it. No, so I do think it's just human nature sometimes. Avoidance is a way to protect ourselves.
Sure.
And things like that. So decisions can be really difficult. Also, if it affects someone else,
Right.
you don't want to be the cause or the blame for the decision you made for another party.
Right.
There's a lot that goes into that.
I think when it comes to difficult decisions, because that's really what we're directing our focus to, is things that impact our life, whether it be smaller day-to-day things, and frankly, brushing your teeth could be, whatever your tendency is, what you're going to attach yourself to. And so I think it's difficult because we really don't, there's not enough introspection in our life, I think, because it's hard. It's challenging to know, why is my relationship where it is right now? Well, probably because I had some tendencies on how I responded, how I acted, what I said, etc. And so to have to address those defaults and make a decision to change certain things about our life it's hard. It's challenging. It first of all, you can be a little bit lazy, but I think there's a pride factor to have to address and say, I've done some things incorrectly for perhaps decades, not just months or years. That's tough. And so I think the reason why those decisions, why we let defaults just take over our life, is because we kind of numb ourselves to the importance of change. And so I think decisions are tough for adults and for big issues because it takes a lot of work and it takes a whole lot of pride-killing introspection.
Right. You really have to address yourself personally, which is, nobody likes to do that because we all think we're pretty perfect, right?
You have to acknowledge that some of the things you did or did not do 20 years ago is on you. It's not on your spouse. It's not on your kids. It's on you.
Yeah.
And that's tough because it's easy and it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Why is it hard to make decisions that impact or change our life? Because it's not comfortable.
Right.
And I
You're
think that's
accepting
the big issue.
responsibility.
And a hard lesson with that for me is when you want to blame somebody else, like you're saying, my reaction was still my decision, regardless of what they did.
Yeah.
Right.
I chose to respond that way. That was
Absolutely.
my decision. And until I acknowledged any role I played in anything, I was unwilling to change because of those default decisions in my mind of, well, if then, if then, if then.
Correct.
It's not always an if then. It's an if and an if.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we don't acknowledge that or rise up to it.
Right. And I think we get comfortable with blaming it on, well, this is just how I was raised. This is what my family's always done. This is my culture. So you just accept it for what it is, and we never take responsibility that it may be that case. That may have been how you were raised. I was raised in a very a Christian home, but I love my dad to death, but he taught me the art of sarcasm. And so there was a lot of sarcasm going around. My grandfather, who was not in church, was a very harsh, rude person. And I feel that some of that kind of came down to me to the point that when I come of age, I'm married, we move out here, I have a 2-year-old, I let that go too far in my own personal life to where I feel like I became very negative about everything, just a negative mentality. And so I'm like, I got to break this habit, because if not, I'm going to pass it down to my daughter. She's going to pass it down to her daughter, and I'm going to be miserable for my whole life. And that's just because things you picked up, but just because that's how it's always been does not justify that's how it should always be.
Right.
And I think too sometimes, like the word tendencies can also, it's a habit too.
Yeah.
And people can break habits. So your tendency doesn't have to be your, like, the decision all the time.
Right.
You can change that. It takes 21 days to change a habit or
Yeah.
create a new habit.
Right.
So you can make better tendencies in as little as 3 weeks. And I think sometimes we just don't give ourselves the credit of what we can accomplish.
And that, I think, is the other hard part about decisions, is we can get into the analysis paralysis perspective of it's challenging to make the decision because you get a
Absolutely.
little overwhelmed mentally.
Yes.
Like that. If you're, if tendencies dictate the direction of your life, and there's some, say, finances, that's not the direction I want to go, then you have to own, I made some mistakes, that's tough. It's not going to be comfortable for a while because I'm going to have to put some disciplines in that I am not used to. But then it's like, where do I start, and what do I give up? Those are decisions that become very difficult, and so it can apply across all spectrums of life.
Yeah. So this is not anything, but what are some practical things that you can do to kind of veer from those overwhelming, like, where do I even start with this? I'm starting a new diet. I want to start reading my Bible more consistently. Like, what are some things maybe that you've done in your own life that says, okay, here's the practical thing I can do to kind of get me on that path of making a better decision?
I think sometimes, and this is with me, I would go head first, and then it's just not sustainable or really attainable.
Yeah.
And I learned that I had to create smaller goals and just add to it to where it's something that is just digestible, so to speak.
Right.
When I started, I wanted to read my Bible more. 5 minutes in the morning.
Right.
I mean, 5 minutes is nothing in the grand scheme of things, but that's how you get started.
Right.
When I started wanting to, like, live a healthier lifestyle, I would say I'm going to work out 30 minutes 3 times a week.
Right.
That's less than the 7. So, and then from there, you just can create new habits.
Right. You're not overwhelming yourself
Correct.
with every day I got to go for 3 hours. Let me just go 30
Exactly.
minutes. At least I did
Same
that.
thing with a diet. If you start, it's hard to maintain a very strict lifestyle change completely.
Yeah.
It's hard to maintain that. If you make it digestible and something small, just cut out soda. Give yourself a soda on Sunday after church.
Absolutely.
Or don't do everything. Don't change what you eat, how you sleep, what you wear. Don't do everything at one time. Sometimes the second you're not meeting those goals, you feel defeated and just let it go altogether. And that's something that I struggled with a lot. Like, oh, well, I didn't do good this day, so what does it matter? Like, the next 3 days, I'll start over again on Monday. No, like, make it digestible so you don't let yourself down.
Yeah, I agree. I think incremental growth is way more sustainable. It is a little more comfortable in the sense that, again, you're not overwhelmed. I think something practical, too, is you really have to connect yourself to the right things.
Yeah.
So, if you spend unwise, attachments are what often determine those tendencies. And so if you have a tendency to spend money unwisely, you will attach yourself to debt, right? You see, if you have a tendency to brush your teeth, you'll attach yourself to better breath. I mean, whatever your tendency is,
Hallelujah.
it attaches you to something. There's something in physics called chemical affinity. And it describes how the tendency of an atom to connect with other atoms, but chemical affinity can take an atom that is not usually doesn't usually make a compound with a different species of atom. And so chemical affinity says that there's a tendency in an atom to be able to alter, to be able to change enough to compound it to something it's not usually associated with. And so it becomes a different chemical. And so I think we have to have some chemical affinity, a tendency that within us that says, I'm not comfortable with that, but I know that's good for me. I need to associate myself with that more. So for instance, if you attach yourself to daily walking,
Yep.
then you will attach yourself to healthier lifestyle. And it's just one change. Forget going to don't forget overall, but I'm saying if you'll start walking and discipline yourself to go for a 30-minute walk after your meal or your lunch, that's going to be a whole lot more likely to sustain and attach yourself to growth in that area, or maybe shrinking in that area, than just saying, I'm going to go get a gym membership. Because how many of you have gotten a gym membership and within the first month, you've gone not at all, right?
Just that one time when you got it. That was it.
So if you start tending to walk after your evening meal, you will attach yourself to weight loss. And then the progression of different steps. So what you attach yourself, I think, is really important. Spiritually, it works as well. If you attach yourself to godly people rather than carnal people, guess what? It's probably going to attach yourself to more godliness.
Yes. I know, like, with the chemical affinity, they're bonds, and that word itself is significant because whatever you bond yourself to, whether it be something that you're drawn to naturally or not, that bond will create a different outcome.
100%.
It's powerful if you really think about what those decisions can create or not create, for that matter.
And I think that's really important because I think everyone in here has failed in something.
Right.
And you have a tendency to think, that's just who I am. I'm never going to be able to lose weight, or I'm never going to have a prayer life like so-and-so or whatever. And if you can start realizing, no, I can attach myself to something that's not natural to me, and I can make a change. It just is that decision component. If you'll attach yourself to it, trust that attachment will create different tendencies.
Yeah, because I think from what I'm hearing just from the beginning, that it's easy, it gets overwhelming. Decisions get overwhelming, especially if they're bigger decisions.
Yeah.
And sometimes things are thrown our way that are completely out of our control. Life literally will flip upside down. You didn't see it coming, and it requires you to kind of be intentional or be in the moment to make decisions. But what I love about what you guys were talking about is when you can't focus on the overwhelming big decisions, you can at least have some control over the little things.
Yeah.
And the little things lead to bigger things. So it's like this compound of just, if I can just control this one thing, that's a positive, then it will continue to grow and develop and become something more.
Yeah, and I think that gets us into being able to take control of our life too, so to speak. Like, you're not just living off of those default decisions at this point. You're actually creating something of your own now.
Right.
And it's just little pieces at a time that make that attainable and make that something that's going to last and benefit your life and other lives. Because that's the goal ultimately, is to live a life that's going to help other people as well. So
Yeah, that's a great attachment too. Service. Attach yourself to service. You're going to be happier.
Yeah. Which all of these things bring about a better quality of life because you're not so self-focused. You're not so just inner focused. You're doing something that makes you feel better. It makes your finances better. It makes your spiritual life better. It makes your attitude, your relationships all around you better. So find things that you can control the small moments and make them bigger moments. And eventually what becomes default will be a completely different picture. Like, wow, you don't even recognize yourself. It doesn't even look like the same scenario.
absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I think that's, I love the word default, whoever came up with that for this discussion, because I think a lot of decisions, everything we discuss further, maybe some more specific decisions, like in the coming weeks, positive decisions, like talking about, I decided I was going to pray 30 minutes every day or whatever, and that's created this. When we get into those, we're going to see that this discussion is the foundation of it. Whatever you set yourself to do, whatever tendencies you develop is going to determine what you attach yourself to.
So you remember when we did the social media fast?
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that my default first thing in the morning, because my phone like sits on my bed. It's not even on the nightstand.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize my default first thing in the morning was boop, social media.
Yep,
It wasn't
me too.
until the social media fast that I was like, wow.
It's funny you say that because literally this morning I woke up And I don't know if it was subconscious, a dream, or what, but I was annoyed that my default is my alarm goes off. It's on my phone. So my phone's virtually the first thing I look at. And I have just gotten back into the tendency of pulling up Twitter or pulling up, whatever, Facebook or social media. And for however determined amount of time I lay there, then I'm like, I was annoyed with myself when I woke up to the point that today, when I first turned the alarm off, I was like, I'm not opening it. And in fact, when we get back from vacation, we're on vacation next week. Don't bother me, okay? When we get back from vacation, I'm going on a social media fast again.
So a decision,
I'm sick of it.
Yeah, a decision I made during that time is once the social media fast stopped, I turned off notifications for all of them. I get there's no pop-up, there's no little icon, there's nothing. I don't have a single notification for social media.
Yeah.
So if I'm going into it, it's a very intentional decision. It's not one that's like, oh, I see that, and then your default is to check it, because when you see a notification on your phone, you're like, oh, I got to get rid of that number.
Well, and I think the
go.
science behind it is it's a dopamine hit that we've become addicted to. And so there's a lot of our young people that deal with anxiety and depression and different things. Now they're seeing that studies go back to their tendencies are to be on social media. Their default social setting is social media. They're so dependent on it that it's creating psychological effects that I don't think really anyone could foresee. But screen time really is, especially on younger people. But I have to confess, political seasons like we're in right now, if I get on Twitter, it is not a good mental health.
No.
I get depressed. I get ticked off. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
He gets frustrated at me, and I'm like,
gets depressed.
what have you been watching today?
Right. I'm going to stop there before I get into confession mode.
It's funny.
So going into this next question, I just kind of want to set it up a little bit. So we're talking about recognizing. Basically, you woke up yesterday and you recognize, wait, I've gotten into this bad habit. Today even. Well, confession's good for the soul. But we were with some friends. We were with some friends a couple weeks ago, and I was actually making fun of, because I feel like, and this is just my opinion, but I feel like parents nowadays, like their kids sleep with them all the time from day one for like years. And so I was actually making fun of that concept. And I was just like, I just can't believe parents do that. Like, it just boggles my mind.
You're all cray-cray.
And
No way.
she's sitting across from me, and I'm learning this in my midlife, is that you bring stuff up and people may have been that person, and you just kind of eat little crow in the moment. And she's like, well, and her daughter's in her 20s now, so this was a long time ago, but she's like, well, we were those people. She's like, night one, my husband went and got her and brought her in bed with us, and she slept with us till she was like 8 or 9.
Oh.
And I'm like, every night? She's like, yeah. And I was like, what is wrong with you?
Ain't no way.
Like, what? So my question is, how do we recognize at what point in those 8 or 9 years did they not recognize that you're kind of in default mode? You're just doing it because that's what you started.
Yeah.
And I think some of it goes to you don't want to break the habit, because there's going to be a lot of work on the end to break the habit. So that's one little example that just kind of blew my mind. But how do you get in to the point that you say, okay, wait a minute, I should not pick my phone up and just automatically look at it. It's not doing me any favors. My brain doesn't need that first thing in the morning, or I need to make some changes because I'm in default mode.
Sounds like we need more friends like you to
blow up our spots. Like,
check
wow,
us in the moment.
With you?
Go ahead, I'll let you answer. What was the question again? Sorry.
I think, how do you recognize? How do you come to that point that, man, it's been a long time that I've been doing this, and just like a light bulb moment, like what maybe prompts that?
So I think a lot of people don't recognize it until an issue arises. And then at that point, you kind of just have to evaluate where you're at and how you got there. Something for me, I was like, subscriptions, get out of here. It's a default decision. And I was like, okay, I'm going to watch this, and then I never have to worry about it again. And then all of a sudden, I've been paying for a gym membership for 2.5 years that I don't go to. Like,
right.
And again, it's kind of tricky because it's hard to recognize, honestly. That's your habit, that's your life. And if it's not hurting anything, or if it's not causing detriment, I don't know that you do acknowledge it. I have lived a lot of life in only the 33 years that I've been here. And so I'm very conscious all the time about what this decision is going to create later, but it's only because I had to live it.
Right.
And I don't know that if I hadn't lived it, I would go into it with this stream of consciousness. Like, this decision is going to affect me long time. And I think that until it's brought up, like, think about what right now is going to create for you in 5 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, me choosing to go into a relationship that I had no business going into created a lot of craziness that you don't recognize.
This is a decision you made you didn't realize you were making.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's kind of brings it to the point that there are two ways. One, you're going to have to at times go by the way of discomfort.
Yeah.
Discomfort will make you recognize I've got to make a change. 2017, I was having a lot of health issues, and turned out that I was basically diabetic. And you talk about realizing in that moment that I was now suffering from decisions I had made 10 years ago when I decided not to curb, the habits of eating, not exercising routinely, those kind of things. 10 years ago when I first knew, like, man, I put on some pounds. If I would have done it then, I wouldn't have any issues like that today. And so the discomfort of that moment, even to this day, if I let it fly or pack on a few pounds, recently my sugar was like, I don't usually have any issues. I don't take any medication for it. I've kept it in check. But there are times when I, just for 3 or 4 months, eat everything I can find, and I packed on a few pounds. Then I go back to having to immediately change decisions, because I don't know if you've ever had high sugar, but you feel it. You feel absolutely miserable. And so when I checked it here recently, I was feeling pretty rough. In fact, I think most of last week when I was sick was because I hadn't been paying attention. And I'd been eating everything, and long summer, and gotten put on a few more pounds. It was very high, like the highest it had probably been since 2017 that I'm aware of. And so immediately I had to go, the discomfort of it said, you got to change some things. So now I've gone back to really restricting, carbs.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's plummeted, a couple hundred points to almost pretty much normal, because I've been walking, exercising, and I've been cutting back on carbs. And immediately it changed. So discomfort demands sometimes you change. I think the higher level of decision making, though, is self-evaluation. Either if you self-evaluate with discipline and change, that's what you want. Yeah. Or discomfort will come, and you're going to come to that, man, I made decisions I didn't know I was making. You'd rather be able to say, I didn't realize 10 years ago when I did make that decision, because of discipline, it affected in the good or the positive my life.
And I think a blessing and a curse is we're very much a comparison society. You can see something that somebody has that you might want, or something that somebody's doing that you might want. And that can trigger you to say, what decisions am I making, or do I need to make to attain that?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's back to the attachment. If you attach yourself to people that are successful, it doesn't have to be a competition. It can be a challenge of, if they can do it, I can do it, or I can at least change enough to attain health for myself.
Once I do it, I'll do it
There
better.
you go. The competition comes back in.
I like what you were saying, that if you had looked at maybe a relationship you get into, or a job you get into, and you see maybe signs up front, you could have spared yourself all of that. Now you don't know. When we make a decision,
Right.
and I think that's the factor we were talking about, the risk, that sometimes when we make a decision, we don't know how that's going to lead us down the path it's going to lead us. Because up front, everything can look rosy, and everything is butterflies and rainbows, and it's beautiful, and then all of a sudden you hit this spot. And that's where another decision would have to be made if, hey, this is unacceptable. But we get too comfortable. Like, well, we justify it. We don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to whatever. I don't want to leave this job because they've been so good to me, so let me just power through it. And we're absolutely miserable. We're just in that default mode when, man, we could make one slight change and it would just open up a door of everything.
Well, comfort and complacency absolutely are the biggest factors, in my opinion. That was for me. Like, last year I was the unhealthiest I had ever been, and I saw somebody that I worked with completely change her life, and I was like, oh, I want to do, like, I can do that. I'm going to do that. And so just one decision, like, I'm going to see a dietitian and see what they say. It all just called with making an appointment. Like, I made a decision. I'm going to start bettering myself. I'm going to start getting healthier.
So good.
Yeah. And I think that off of that, if we had been able to look back, retro back, and say, man, if I'd only had noticed some signs, maybe I wouldn't have done things the way I had. Maybe I would have paid more attention and made sure I didn't put those pounds on or whatever. So how does that kind of affect your decision making going forward? So I think that we need to learn from our past. We need to learn from our bad decisions, and we need to learn from our good ones.
Right.
And so how does that help our defaults going forward of like, I don't want to repeat that again. I definitely do not want to end up that same way. Or you're not even the one making decisions. I want to tell you, there's a lot of people that I've looked at their life, and I'm like, I would never do that just because Sally did it, and look what happened to her. I would never do that. It could be anything. It could be, oh, well, she took a job, and she's working every Sunday and every Wednesday, so guess what? She backslid. Well, I would never do that. That's just an example that I can look at and say she made that decision for herself. I would not work on Sundays and Wednesdays because I don't want the same outcome. So how do you feel that decisions maybe that we've made in the past help dictate better decision making so that we don't get in those bad habits of just default lifestyle? Does it give you an example or give you something to...
Your past decisions,
Yes.
do they affect current decisions?
Yes. So how would you say that really impacts things that you're going to do in the future, whether it's you or somebody else that you've seen?
Yeah, I'd say that it's huge. I mean, it's the consequence benefit, it's the reward or consequence kind of effect of how decisions work. So to me, it's very obvious. If you look back and realize that was a poor decision that resulted in this, and maybe it's even with finances or whatever else, then you evaluate, why am I not spiritual? Well, maybe it's because, similar to my financial poor decision, I've missed too much church. I don't pray routinely. I only get a word from God at church, those kind of things. And it affects my relationships and my joy and all these things. So I think evaluating where your life is the real key that I keep coming back to, that I think everyone should do. It's either self-introspection or it's discomfort that will demand a new decision, or it will confirm I made a right decision.
And how often do you think that we should try to put in practice evaluating those things? Should you wait once a year? Like,
No.
our thing is always January 1st,
No.
we're going to make all these big decisions.
No,
and
I
new
think
lives
people need to get into a healthy habit of weekly devotion, and somewhere in that weekly devotion, evaluate yourself.
Yeah.
Think about some things. Talk about defaults. Write some default questions. How am I doing with my family?
Right.
And let that how are my what is the financial shape of my life? Am I spiritual or am I carnal right now? Write those questions down, and somewhere in the weekly habit, go back to them and assess, because it'll assess the immediacy of the moment, some things that need to change, and it will assess overall, like, yeah, I'm not as spiritual as I was last week, but I'm still pretty spiritual.
Right.
you're going to have ebbs and flows. Or it's, man, I have declined over 6 months, and I'm not near where I should be. I haven't prayed for a whole quarter has gone by, and outside of Wednesday night or Sunday, or I haven't prayed routinely. Then I think that's going to help you. But it is a discipline thing in the sense that most people don't work on themselves. They just don't. They just go through they have the defaults. They just go through life, and 3 weeks are over, and you're like, what did I even do? And you didn't do much. You got up, you brushed your teeth, hopefully, you took a shower, hopefully, or somewhere, and you get the point. You go to work, you get home, you eat dinner, you say, hey, what's up? And then you watch TV or whatever, you go back to bed. That's not a life.
Right.
Of course, there are going to be days and weeks like that, but there should be a time in the week. We just need to develop a habit of spiritual devotion, and in that devotion, evaluating where I am.
Yeah.
So I think that's got to be key, and I'm going to go back to it. Those defaults are changed through evaluation or through discomfort, and I don't think you should wait till discomfort.
Correct. And I think you have to put in an effort to understand yourself. You have to put in an effort to know, like, for me, I don't ever make a big change starting on a Monday. I do it on Friday, and this is because on Monday through Friday, you can do great, and then the weekend comes and you derail.
You just lost my wife.
So So
She's the queen of Monday. I'm gonna
that's
start
fine.
Monday.
Hey, to each their own. If you
Oh,
like
I'm
it,
not
I
even
love
with
it.
you. You're doing
I
good.
might
Preach,
start on Monday.
preach to her.
But I started on a Friday because if I can do it through the weekend, which is the hardest part,
It's a good concept.
come Monday, I'm like, this is nothing. And by day 3, you're over the hump, and it's Monday.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, cool. That's just a decision that I made for myself. If I'm starting something new, if I want to implement something in my life, I do it on Friday because everyone does it on Monday. And then come Friday, you're no longer doing it. At least I was no longer doing it.
Yeah.
So that's something that I did for me.
I like that.
And you have to recognize yourself. You know, like if you're gonna go through Chick-fil-A and that's your weakness, and you know when you go there you get 2 chicken sandwiches, a large fry, a 5-piece nugget, 18 sauces, and a Coke. Maybe don't go to Chick-fil-A. Maybe go somewhere else that you don't love.
Take a
as
different
much.
route, so
Right.
you're not even tempted.
Right.
Your car's default is just to turn into Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah, they drive themselves now, so totally plausible. So.
Muscle memory.
I love that. I love the concept of starting on the weekend. Just give yourself a different
You
mix it
do?
up.
Praise God.
the concept.
Folks, this was the
I
best first
literally-
things right here, man.
I made no commitment that I was going to start on the weekend. I just said I love the concept.
There it is. You got to make the
I
commitment
love
to
your
change.
thought process, but we're not implementing that over here.
Yeah, she's like, I love it.
sharing
Never going to do it, but I love it.
I can see how that would work for you.
Yes, good choice for you, Brittany. No, I like the idea because we do. We get stuck in these patterns that you can only do something on a Monday because that's the start of the week. No, not technically. You can start whatever you want. So
Yeah.
good for you.
And then when it comes to like the spiritual concept,
Keep going. This is good. Wow.
when it comes to the spiritual concept of things, I heard a message actually when I was in Mississippi back in April with my parents, and their pastor was talking about like, are you carnal minded or are you kingdom minded? And I was like, well. And so there's times in my life where I'm very kingdom minded, and then there's times in my life where I'm very carnal minded. And so when I heard that, I said, I need to reflect on that. I need to reflect on that a lot more. And reevaluate and make decisions to change how minded and what I'm minded on.
So someone made a comment, so I want to read this comment, and then I'll let each one of you answer to kind of wrap up because we're out of time. But the comment says, I think sometimes you have to surround yourself with people that will give you constructive criticism and call you out on some of your stuff because sometimes we have habits and tendencies that we don't know are wrong.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's really important. I think that statement is very important. So what are your thoughts on that? Having that person in your life, and we already talked about it, make sure that you're attaching yourself to something that's positive and godly. So how important is that so that when you need a moment, you may not even see it. You may not even see that it's a problem. You're just so used and accustomed to it that you have somebody in your life that will kind of call you out on that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm surprisingly, if y'all didn't know this, I'm pretty straightforward and blunt. Tell it how it is. But one of my friends, and this is another thing is, you know, Raj had said a few times, your makeup of the 5 closest people in your life. And at this point, 4 out of my 5 are in this church. And it's the one who's not was like, hey, I know, like, I appreciate your candor. You need to work on your execution sometimes because not everyone receives things the same way you do.
Yeah.
I know that if I were to say it just like that, it wouldn't offend you because you're just like acknowledging the information or that's a fact or that's your opinion. She said, but you do need to work on your execution sometimes because so some people are sensitive and you can really do damage there. And I was like, oh, well, I just was telling you straightforward, not sugarcoating it, not telling you what you want to hear because that's what I want. But I had to realize that's not what everyone wants or needs for that matter. And it is important that you surround yourself with people who are going to pour into you.
Absolutely.
And I realize now that, you know, the 4 out of my 5 and the 5 that doesn't go to this church, she's a fantastic person. I'm not saying anything about that. But I'm happier now. Yeah. I have a much better life now. My life is full of joy, and it's because the people that are in my life are giving me that back.
Yeah.
And they snatch me up real quick. Like, where are you? What are you doing? I haven't talked to you in 2 days. Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? Like,
Yep.
you seem a little off at church. Are you okay? What are we praying for? Things like that. And it's super imperative if you want to have a successful life in anything that you
Yeah.
have the people who
I
are going to
agree.
call you out and point you in a better direction.
I think the answer is clear. Yes, you need accountability, period.
Yes.
You need accountability, whether it's your spouse, whether it's a friend, you a parent, you need someone that has permission, for lack of a better word, to kind of look you in the eyes and say, hey, there's some stuff I've noticed. I may be in left field, but this is concerning to me, and address the issue. So it's the principle of accountability that absolutely, I think, you have to have someone that can talk sense to you sometimes, because we all can be blind. We can have blinders. We can think we're right.
Yeah.
How many of you ever thought you were right once or twice or 10 or 100,000 times?
I mean,
You can think you're right. And if there's nobody with a dissenting opinion to say, you might want to look at this from a different perspective. Yeah, everybody appreciates truth, and I don't even know that that's the case, but at least put some love on it, you know? I think it's really vitally important to have someone in your life to whom you're accountable that can just be real with you.
Right.
So I think that's very, very important.
Yes, I agree.
Because whatever, again, it goes back to defaults and attachments. Whatever you attach yourself to is going to determine your direction.
Right.
And so if you attach yourself to the persons or right people in your life, they absolutely will help determine the direction of your life.
Absolutely.
And sometimes if you're surrounding yourself with people that are calling you out and they're making you uncomfortable, that's letting you know you need to grow.
Yeah.
That's where you need to build and work to change those things. And it's super, super important, because you'll just be stagnant, you'll be complacent, you'll be comfortable, and you'll just remain. You won't get any better. You won't change anything about yourself.
Absolutely. You don't need to only have fans, so to speak, that just are always telling you what you want to hear.
Right.
You've got to have some voices that, with love, that love you, but will say, you're headed the wrong, that's just not going to work.
Yeah. So ultimately, that brings you down to your final decision. Will I listen to these people and adjust some things in my life so to become a better person? Or will I stay in my default mode and eventually lose relationships, friendships, blame it on everybody else? Goes back to the first that we were talking about. We don't take responsibility for our own actions. So when we have God in our life and he's speaking to us, we have our friends, our families, close acquaintances, we have the body of Christ, and all these people working together to make us the best version of ourselves, because the song says he's still working on me to make me who I ought to be, then we can be very successful if we make the decision to listen, to submit, to be obedient. If not, we're going to go right back to that default mode.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Because our tendencies and our defaults just set the course, we're not thinking often enough down the road.
Yeah.
And we serve a God, the Bible says, that knows the end from the beginning.
Right.
Now, we'll never have that full perspective like God. We know that. But we do need to look at consequences like God does.
Right.
We do need to look at decisions, sin, things like that. God looks at sin, the wages thereof are death. The end of sin is death. He looks at the end, not just the beginning. And so we need to have a tendency in our life. We need to set a default in our life to kind of evaluate ahead, not especially in the routine.
Right.
Is this routine going to get me anywhere by the end of this year? Or am I just going to be kind of miserable and be like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't understand. Well, because how many of you done that in a year in past times? You're like, get to the end of the year and like, man, I just don't, what was that year about? I don't, well, because you need to really evaluate what the end is going to be. And you can't completely alter the outcome, but you can certainly attach yourself to the right things to make a difference.
Right. So I guess you just ask yourself the question, am I being a good and faithful servant? If that's going to be the question we're asked, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Everything I do, I want to make sure that I'm aligning with that.
Yeah.
Every habit of my life. So Sister Allison said also there's the Holy Ghost, so be sensitive to the Lord, which I think is a great directive.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you've learned something today. Over the next few Sundays, we're going to be going a little bit deeper into this. Thank you for your input. Thank you for challenging us and opening up our perspective. And all of us can leave here today and make a better decision. Am I going to stay in my defaults, or am I going to choose to do something different?
Yeah, and I think it starts like Brittany said earlier. Don't change everything.
Yeah.
Change one thing.
Find something.
Yeah.
And focus on that. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us for First Things. We will see you in 15 minutes for our main service.